So Marvel's Secret Invasion show is just about to come out. For me, currently recording this video, it hasn't come out yet. I'm not going to lie, having watched some of the trailers, I can't not think of the original comic book, then compare it to the trailers and be left with feeling meh. But even if so, I'm a nerd, so these sorts of things get me excited. And if you've watched my previous video about me composing a hypothetical theme for the Guardians of the Galaxy, you know what you're gonna get. I started thinking, what if, hypothetically, I was the one to compose the score or just a theme for Secret Invasion? I don't want these challenge videos somehow make it seem like I'm inferring that I would do a better job than the composer associated with the project, or even better than any of you guys. I'm trying to have fun and pose myself a challenge. If you guys would like to try this challenge on your own, post it and join the fun. Now, like I mentioned, usually the job of the composer is to compose a piece of music that can match specific scenes, and hopefully when you're doing themes, can represent characters, moods, vibes, situations, and anything you can think of. Many of the times, it ends up being more of a collaborative effort between the composer and the director, and sometimes studio executives when there are like too many hands stirring the pot, where said director or directors will come out to the composer and give him some sort of instructions for what sort of vibe, sometimes instrumentation, genre, or just general gibberish, and the composer goes out of his way to interpret that and figure out some ideas, which will then be submitted to said director for approval and further discussion. And even though it can happen that the directors of the show just gave him free reign to do whatever he wanted with the score, it's just how things work. You get directions to follow, and you follow them. According to Wikipedia, Chris Bauer seems to be the composer attached to the Secret Invasion, and taking in consideration his work for shows like Bridgerton and When They See Us, and movies like Green Book and Space Jam: A New Legacy, and Haunted Mansion, plus the 2019 and 2020 Madden NFL games, I don't think we have anything to worry about. Since I can't really communicate with any hypothetical directors, I thought that a cool way to give myself some outside directions and restrictions would be to spin the wheel. I know this might sound a bit funky, but stay with me. So we're going to start out with figuring out how restricted we're going to be. That can go from like no restrictions at all, which is just like a 10% chance, or to get like a lot of restrictions on, because the truth is not every director is the same, and some directors are just more picky than others and have a more specific vision that they won't match sometimes. So let's spin the wheel and see where we end up. We got this option last time too. That means that there's going to be one criteria that I have to meet, then the rest of it I can just figure it out my own way. And to figure out what that is going to be, we're going to spin another wheel. Genre type. I think this one is pretty self-explanatory. Now to figure that genre out, I just typed on Google list of music genres and we got 51 options here. So we're just going to generate a random number between 1 to 51, and whichever one we got is going to be the one we have to focus on. Ooh, number 30. We have two options for number 30. Either count them vertically, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and up to this side, and number 30 would be instrumental, which honestly isn't really too much of a challenge. The horizontal one would be progressive rock. Now, as you might be able to see, I have a guitar there, and there's more guitars over there. I actually feel like progressive rock might just be a better challenge. So with that being said, I'm going to figure out some ideas, and when I figure something out, I'll come back to you guys. I started thinking on some ideas, and I realized the whole like metal genre problem, which is that progressive rock can mean a lot of things. Bands like The Police are progressive rock, so are Toto. Rush are progressive rock, and there are plenty of other examples, but even just with those three bands, sure, there are some things in common, but in other ways, they couldn't be further apart. We could go out of our way to randomly generate a specific band so that the director would give us the vibe of a specific band, but that could be a challenge for another time. So I think for now we can keep the bigger network of what progressive rock can be and give ourselves a little bit of extra options. And as I mentioned before, when it comes to restrictions, progressive rock ain't too bad. And I know they're not exactly the same genre, but the music of James Bond and Mission Impossible, and even some like action-y cop movies really feature a lot of guitar and like keyboards and sort of synth in order to match the vibe of the movie that we're watching. But if you think about it, all those instruments and sounds, especially with some like added drums to it, those wouldn't be instruments that you'd consider out of the ordinary in the progressive rock genre. This Secret Invasion show has been described as being spy-ish, action, mystery, government thriller sort of a thing. The comics is about like Skrulls who can shapeshift into other people, infiltrate our planet and society, so it kind of has that like mystery cop movie vibe, especially because Nick Fury is already a bit of a lone wolf sort of a character, but now that he's even more getting this feeling that he can't trust anyone, we won't really know if the characters we're seeing on screen are really the characters we're accustomed to, or if they are undercover Skrulls. And even the opposite can happen sometimes. Maybe this out of the ordinary character shows up and we get this feeling of like, oh, they definitely have to be an undercover agent, they have to be a Skrull, and maybe it turns out they're just a plain old human. And I thought that maybe one way that we could convey that is to set up a resolution. Maybe we set up a chord progression, like an F chord, chord, G chord, and we resolve to C. When we're playing around this key with these chords, we immediately get this tense need to resolve that G chord to the C major chord. And I thought, what if, the same way that we have these expectations that maybe this character is a scroll or this character is not a scroll, when we get to one of those dominant chords or chords with a dominant function, and they want to resolve to a specific chord, what if we resolve to another chord? Like perhaps... that chord comes pretty out of the left field, but with the proper voice leading, that chord and other chords might actually work and lead you into a direction that perhaps you weren't thinking of. I wasn't planning on this to happen, but there's a thunderstorm going on. I'm currently recording this with my phone with the flash turned on. Pardon for the audio quality and video quality, but some of you guys mentioned that the previous video would have been cooler if it was more vlog style and I showed you the progress along the way. I still have guitar sound because I'm using like a battery powered amplifier. I now have a prototype for the idea. I was just messing around with add 9 chords because, you know, add 9 chords sound kind of prog rockish. So I started messing around with this idea like... using the same shape here. I think that's quite prog rockish. These are kind of ambiguous chords. If I play it with a not time signature, I was thinking something in 7. I think there might be something on that vibe. I think it's enough spoopy, intense, and I think we have different ways to resolve it. Okay, so I'd guess it's been probably around a week since you last saw me. Because of teaching and playing live 3 times a week and getting rehearsals done, probably spent around 10 hours on this project. Even though I was feeling very confident because I'm very familiar with doing music that is within the progressive rock genre, it took me a while to really balance out the vibes between the restrictions we had and my original vibe and ideas. In the Guardians video, we were talking about doing a theme for the movies, but now while working for Secret Invasion, we're doing a TV show. And even though TV shows nowadays are much more in-depth and almost like smaller sized movies span across multiple episodes, that doesn't mean that there aren't some differences about it. And one of those things is to have an opening or an intro or some like introduction credits. True, there are some movies having opening credits, but especially nowadays, those introductory credits have really fallen out of fashion. But why is doing an intro song relevant? Well, the truth is, when you have those opening credits, you don't just usually have random music going on, you have the main themes of the show supporting it, so that when you do watch the opening/intro to the show, not only do you get general and visual vibes of, well, what the vibe of the show is, but you also get a taste of what the musical vibe is of the show. So that if you are following the show week after week, if you for some reason forget or get less familiar with what the themes for different characters sound like, or what the vibe of the music is from episode to episode, the intro always comes to remind you of it and be like, hey, this is what we're working with. Unless we're talking about the intro to Game of Thrones, most intros and openings are around a minute to a minute and a half. And even then, sometimes people feel like it's a little bit too long because they just want to get on with the show. And that can of course present some issues, the most notable one being the lack of time. Even if you're just working with one single theme and you want to really get a scope of how the different vibes connect, so when you arrange a theme throughout the episode, you really are matching it along to the different scenes. But when you do it for the opening of the show, you want to make it feel like it has a lot of depth, but at the same time, you're squeezing as much of the vibe juice as you can so that the audience can really get a vibe of what you're trying to do musically. So I thought this time I would prepare to you a piece of music in the form of an intro song. The timer here is about 1 minute and 45 seconds, a little bit extra longer than that, but it has more to do with trails of reverb and delay, which can easily be used in the transition between the opening credits and the actual first scene, so I think it's fine. For the sake of keeping things easy, I just used the same preset as I used in the previous video, so if you're not familiar with these sounds, you can go check it out there. We just have a couple of minute differences to fit in with the vibe that we were looking for. We have this s.h.i.e.l.d. 8 vintage synth patch in the Omnisphere. Even though it has quite a huge range, it kind of even has a bit of a theremin vibe, which isn't what I was looking for, but when I heard the low patch notes for this, kind of just sounded like a kind of bees doing always the same thing, usually matched by the strings to get it a little bit of more oomph. and to again give you that vibe of, is it a scroll, is it a human, is it a traditional and organic instrument, or is it a fake synthy instrument? I went for this other patch called Old Distant Piano that sounds like an old distant piano. It's very reverby, very haunting, but it kind of has like an artificial vibe to it, which kind of matches these spy thriller cop movies to get that progressive rock thing. There's a bunch of things we could use, but a couple of things we couldn't short out on would be guitars, bass, and drums. So I'm using Easy Drummer 2 with the progressive library. This is actually the library that I usually use for drum sounds. Then we have a couple of guitar tracks spread left and right with a bass down the middle. Those I actually played myself rather than programming them. I used my Fender Rarities semi-hollow Strat, not for any particular reason, it was just a guitar I had laying around and sound-wise it matched the vibe. And for the bass I just used my Chord Gene Siemens Punisher bass. It's not the best sounding bass, but I think that actually added to the vibe of it. Everything was tracked using Neural's Quad Cortex straight into my computer. For the guitar sounds, I have a video that goes through my presets, which you can also check out. And for the bass, I was using something simple like an MPEG SVT sort of a sound. Looking back on it, I thought maybe I could go a little bit less gainy on it, but I don't think it ruins the track. I will play you guys this track and then I'll explain a couple more things in detail. The melody pretty early in the piece on the piano part. I purposely tried to repeat it as much as I could throughout the piece so that one, it could camouflage itself like the scrolls into as many different versions as possible, but also the way it is played can kind of evoke the feeling of raindrops, almost to mimic how in a detective show sometimes clues just fall out of nowhere, or the characters feel like they're just taking clues out of stuff that we didn't even notice. And even sometimes this mystery and puzzle that we're trying to figure out, the pieces just fall together by themselves. The main melody that is usually played by the piano is used by the strings here, just morphed to fit in the vibe of this new part. Like I mentioned before, the progressive rock genre is a big genre, so I wanted to do a couple of things that match different vibes. We straight away start with the prog rock with odd time signatures, giving the bass a strong but also groovy sounding bass line, moving between chords that aren't diatonic but kind of match together, kind of leave you with that feeling that you're not quite sure where you're going to. A thing that I like to do, just for a little bit of extra sauce, is to have low woodwinds in combination with the electric bass. In the first part, we have like these police at 9 chords, and we have these like almost Toto-ish chords with a capo, with riffs that are kind of polyrhythmic, where I feel them as 4/4, but you might not feel them as 4/4. And when it gets time to explode, we get a little bit more heavy with the guitars and bass, some like more rush segments where the guitars get distorted. And the bass matches it. I also forgot to mention that this tight rhythm part could perhaps be used for an action scene later on, as in like a little ostinato or something like that. Just like last time, I did very few automation and very few EQing and mixing. I just wanted to get some ideas down, and in a way kind of prove to you guys you don't really need to have fancy plugins or fancy sample libraries or a lot of mixing skills to get something to start with, to get some ideas going, then to like mold those ideas into something that you can actually be proud of. In this case, like I mentioned before, it was a little bit of an experimental time. I was feeling very confident, but then as I went by, I was kind of like, I'm not sure if this is working as I'd like to. For some reason, the video you were just watching got corrupted at the end. Let's try to ignore the fact that I'm with very different clothing and my hair is super messy. There are a bunch of genres and vibes that I thought I'd compose songs with, but a progressive rock, spy, political thriller was definitely not one of them, much less in a minute-and-a-half opening credits sort of a way. And even though I struggled with it more than I'd care to admit, the truth is, there are many parts of it that I think are super cool and can be definitely used within the context of the show without any changes or alterations. So if you'd care to, please participate in this challenge, post it and send me the link through Instagram, and I'll be sure to check it out, and who knows, even maybe do a video about it. Please leave your thoughts and opinions, plus suggestions for other videos like this that you'd like me to do in the comment section below. And if you've enjoyed this video, check out some of my previous ones and perhaps even subscribe to the channel. And when you do, please turn on all the notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. But I won't bore you for much longer. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope to see you in the next time. Until then, cheers!